This week, advocates of police reform are hoping to see the product of bipartisan negotiations on Capitol Hill. The goal is to create a bill that can pass the Senate. Congresswoman Karen Bass and Senators Cory Booker and Tim Scott are leading the negotiations. They ultimately need to find 10 Republican votes to avoid a Senate filibuster. In March, House Democrats passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. It would ban chokeholds, some no-knock warrants, as well as racial and religious profiling. Here's how the Floyd family's attorney described a meeting with the president Tuesday.
He said that he doesn't want to sign a bill that doesn't have substance and meaning. So he is going to be patient to make sure it's the right bill, not a rush bill.
I want to bring in Lorenzo Boyd. He is the Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer at the University of New Haven. He's also a nationally recognized leader in police community relations. Lorenzo, good to have you back on Red and Blue. When we last spoke on the day of the Derek Chauvin murder conviction, you stressed that often police reform is driven on the department level. With that in mind, what do you want to see from the federal legislation being negotiated now?
Part of the problem we have is that there are so many individual police departments across the nation. We have no national standard whatsoever. So the police department in Louisville and New York are going to be very different than places like Boise and Flint. So if we have some sort of national standard that all the local and state departments can point to, then that'll put people in the right direction.
Well, what do you see as essential? Those standards you mentioned, but what else do you think must be included in whatever bill Congress negotiates?
We need to start at the beginning. A lot of times we talk about once the civilian and the police officer come in contact, we talk about levels of de-escalation. What we should talk about is the initial approach, the pretext for the stop. We need to talk about cultural competence. We need to talk about police officers understanding the lived experience of the people that they're policing, and the community members as well have to understand the role of the police. If we can get police officers and community members together on the same page moving forward, I think that's going to help, and that's going to help with the conversation, because so many times the police and the community aren't talking to each other. If we can get them to talk to each other, that's going to be a really good start.
And on this question, though, Lorenzo, of qualified immunity, this is the idea, the doctrine that shields government officials from being held personally liable for constitutional violations. How important do you see this issue being as a police reform measure? It has been a sticking point, as you know, for a very long time.
This is the point where both sides are digging their heels in. One side wants all, the other side wants none. Something more realistic is something in the middle. If we can find a common ground, if we can move off of the strict level of qualified immunity to something a little more palatable, I think that's a pathway forward. But let's understand that people need to be held accountable. Police officers, just like doctors and dentists and everybody else, need to be held accountable when they do something wrong. And for the vast majority of police officers, the vast majority of officers do the right thing every day. They do their job with honor and integrity, and it's not going to affect them. But we do need to figure out a way to hold the bad officers accountable, or the officers that make bad decisions. And I think peeling off some of these layers could be the step in the right direction.
Yeah, because I guess my question then, Lorenzo, is there middle ground on this issue of qualified immunity? Are you suggesting there is?
Oh, there's absolutely going to be middle ground, and it's going to take legislative action, because we can't expect the police to negotiate away something that they have, and the community is not going to get 100% of what they want. That's not how this works. We need to find somewhere in the middle, and there's going to be give and take on both sides, but we do need to acknowledge that with the law that says that there's a duty to intervene, that's going to help this as well.
So, Lorenzo, I know you have worked with a number of police departments and have done training. What sense are you getting from how officers are reacting to calls for change coming from George Floyd's death?
Most of the officers that I talk to, and certainly most of the progressive police chiefs, are on board with the change. They acknowledge that what they've been doing for the last 100 years isn't really working. They acknowledge that we need to do something different. The problem is to acknowledge what it is, because one side is talking about totally defunding or disbanding, and the other side is saying we need to keep things where we are. Again, we need to find the middle ground, because there's a lot of good police officers out there that are trying to do the right thing. There's a lot of people in the community that are saying we don't want zero police. We just want better policing. And if it starts with training, it starts with cultural competence, it starts with community members and police officers getting to know each other. So that's where the middle ground happens, because it's really easy to decide, I hate the police as a monolithic group. It's a lot harder to decide, I know a police officer and I hate that person. The more you get to know someone, the more you understand their backstory, the harder it is to hate them. And if we can get community and police together, I think that's the step forward.
Lorenzo Boyd, once again, we really appreciate your perspective and expertise. Thank you.
My pleasure.